Morning. It's good to be here. Just watching Leo just smile from the front pew is just kind of just a joy to see. And so anyway, just babies just in general are just fun. And so anyway, we've just been smiling at him all morning. He's been smiling back, so it's been very nice. And I am way off base now. I'm way off topic. It's just where I am, so I apologize for that. I did want to talk a little bit about, Jim Bailey, he used to say, a good sermon in that the preacher tells you what he's going to say, then he says it, and then he tells you what he said. I've also heard other patterns that it's just kind of like, hey, every good sermon has 3 points. That's not always the case, in either case. I don't necessarily always like to tell you what I'm going to tell you and then tell you and then tell you what I said. I don't necessarily like that format. And when we're taking a look at Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 through 46, these are just some very, very short verses. And so when we take a look at this, I have a different way of thinking about this. I have a way of seeing exactly how I want to present this. And so I don't necessarily talk about my method of how I want to present or something like that, but if I can tell you what I'm going to say and then tell you what I'm saying and then tell you what I said, I can maybe go and be a little bit metacognitive here and tell you a little bit about what I'm thinking and how I'm thinking. I want you to consider John and Mary. They are owners of some land out in the Sierra Nevada range in California. And for years they would walk around their property and they noticed just this tin can that was sitting out there on the property, just kind of barely sticking out of the ground. And land in the West is kind of an odd thing. You might have had situations where years and years ago maybe someone died and so they might have buried somebody there and a coffee can would have been something that they would have placed flowers in and just kind of was a marker. But this was barely sticking up out of the ground. And they walked by it for years without really thinking about it, and then one day the curiosity got the better of them, and they said, well, maybe it's a marker, maybe it's a property marker, maybe there's a line there or something along those lines. And so they decided that they were going to try it out, and they were going to dig it up. And so they started digging it up, and they found 8 cans containing gold coins minted between 1847 and 1849 with an estimated value of $10 million. Those kind of stories just fire our imagination, don't they? And I mean, they do it from a very early age. And I really wasn't into gold when I was in second grade, but I tell you one of the things that I really was into, I had a friend, and he had Indian arrowheads. Native American, Lynn Island arrowheads. And he would bring them to school, and we would see them, and he said, yeah, you should be able to find them anywhere around here, because Lynn Island were all over this area. And so I would go out into the woods, and I would start digging, and I'd think, maybe this is a good spot. And I would dig, and I'd get my feet wet, and I wouldn't find anything. And people around me, that even just a few miles away, were finding arrowheads all over the place. And one of them even found this old tomahawk, and it was just, he found a tomahawk. I mean, these were amazing things. And so when we hear these stories of these treasures and things like that, I think our imaginations really get fired up. A few years ago, there was a big story about a guy walking in the mountains of California. And it's always California because there's gold in our hills. But he was walking around there and he found a 6-pound nugget of gold on public lands. And he's allowed to keep that. And so I think, well, you know what, I want to go out there to California. I'll bring a metal detector and start walking around in the hills of the Sierra Nevada. Maybe I'll find something like that. These are the kinds of stories that drive our imagination wild. What would we do if we were to come up with that? We might do all sorts of things. I'm not exactly sure that I'm even going to be able to get your attention back after these stories, because now they're dancing with visions of finding gold or panning for gold out there in some river in Colorado or whatever else. And these are the stories that really fire up our imagination. Maybe we have to wait for Jesus to get our imagination, because he tells a similar story. And as he tells this story, there is a man. And this man, he discovers a treasure hidden in a field. And it's not an unusual thing. We might think that that's kind of odd, because we're not in the habit of digging a hole in the ground and putting our money there. That's not what we do. But in ancient times, that was definitely the case. And it was all the way up until the time when banks were federally insured. People would do this. They would take cans and they would put their treasure in it. And people who had money in the ancient times, they might find a field, they might have a field, and they'd bury their money there because it's the safest place for it. You got it in the house, everyone expects the money to be there in the house. And so they would bury their money around. And maybe, they knew that war was coming. And so what they would do is they'd take their money and they would bury it somewhere so that maybe after the war, if they survived the war, they could come back and they could get it. And they could have it, and that was something that they would do. But there's this man and he discovers a treasure hidden in a field. And so somebody put it there. Somebody did that. But the only problem is that this guy who found it, he did not own that property. The property was not his. And so what he does is, he goes and he reburies the treasure, and he goes and he sells everything that he has because he wants to buy that field. Then he goes and buys that field. He sold absolutely everything that he had, faster than a fire sale, and he bought that field. Now, if we knew for a fact that everything we owned paled in comparison to a treasure on a piece of property, and we had it in our power to go ahead and buy that piece of property, to say that there were 8 cans of gold coins buried on it, we'd probably do it. We would probably go ahead and do that, but we'd have to know for sure that it was worth it. But we got to understand that this guy sold absolutely everything. Now let's let that sink in just a little bit. Because maybe we have some things that are semi-valuable, okay? But it's not necessarily those things that are valuable to us in monetary ways that really matter, is it? It's my grandpa's pocket knife that he carried with him while he was alive, that I saw him take out. And I saw him sharpen, and I saw him do all sorts of amazing things. He'd take a piece of paper, and he'd take the weight of that knife, and he would just let the weight of the knife cut straight through that paper. I have that knife. It's my knife. Or the quilt that my grandma made for me. She made a quilt specifically for every single one of her grandchildren, and I've got one of those quilts. And so that's my quilt that my grandma made. And so we've got these things, and this guy absolutely sells absolutely everything. And the question is, what have you got? What would it take for you to give it up? Well, it would have to be a treasure indeed, wouldn't it? So this is where the gears in our minds start grinding. He sold everything, but he'll be richer than he has ever been, and can replace or maybe even buy back the things that he had to begin with. At least when I first heard this parable, I thought, well, that's great, yeah, he sold everything, but anything that was valuable he can buy back, couldn't he? Because he's got this treasure now that he can go ahead and buy that back. It'd be fine. It's a win-win situation. But you see, the next parable puts a wrench in that. You see, we get the impression that the guy who bought the field from someone, that certain someone that he bought the field from, didn't know that the treasure was there. Didn't know it. But the next parable is this merchant, and he is in the business of buying and selling pearls. And he's buying this pearl from a seller who knows a thing or two about the quality of pearls when it comes to pearls. And so it's not this field where the guy doesn't know the value, it's this guy that does know the value. And so what we have is this merchant, he comes to this seller and he recognizes this pearl. He says, this is an amazing pearl. And I don't know exactly what that would look like. I don't know what it is. I know that pearls were amazing back then. People loved pearls. People love pearls now. I know that the larger that they are and the rounder that they are and there are different characteristics of it, the different colors and all this kind of stuff, there's something. But anyway, whatever it was, this guy, he wants to buy this pearl. And so he sells absolutely everything that he has to get it. And he pays market value. It's not like the guy who bought the property. He pays market value. And it costs him absolutely everything. He now possesses the best pearl he's ever laid his eyes on, and he's not letting go. This guy is pearl rich and cash poor. He's now out of business. I've got to be wrong, right? I mean, this pearl is just a pearly stepping stone to pearlier things, isn't it? I mean, come on. I mean, a pearl? Living on the streets, but you've got this pearl? What's going on? Surely he'll sell it, he'll make a profit and move on to the bigger and the better. Well, let's take a look at these parables again. Matthew 13, 44 through 46. And I realize that this is the first time that we're reading these, but we're going to read them. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in the field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So where does Jesus say that he's going to sell this and move on to bigger and better things? He never tells us that this treasure or this pearl is leverage. He never tells us that this is somehow fungible, that it's something that they can use. It's not that. The treasure here is the point. The pearl is the point. And if we're of the sort who are willing to hear something that Jesus says is statistically unlikely in Matthew 13, we understand that, don't we? Jesus says that there are a few that are going to hear this. I'm telling people parables because there are only a few that are going to hear this and get it. But if we are going to be of that sort, if we're going to be that, we're going to have to understand that the kingdom is the point. We don't get the kingdom to move on to something else. We get the kingdom because there is nothing else. Nothing else. And that's really what we're supposed to hear here. That's really what we're supposed to get here. And so the question is, are we ready to give up everything for this kingdom? That pocket knife. That quilt. How about rich family traditions running counter to the kingdom? How about our reputations? How about a hobby or a career standing in the way of true discipleship? How about our own pride and our own understanding? How about all of that? And if we're not willing to give that up, then we don't have the ears to hear and really don't understand what the true value of the kingdom is. Two very short stories. A lot of punch. And so the question is, do we look at the kingdom that way? Do we live the kingdom that way? Do we have the kingdom that way? If you're not a child of God, you obviously don't. It's a decision not to make lightly, but it is a decision that Jesus says you need to make, because the kingdom, in these particular verses, is worth it. It's worth everything. It's worth absolutely everything. And so today, if you decided that that's what you want, we give the opportunity every single week for you to enter into His kingdom. And really the invitation, as I said over and over again, it's open every single day. When you finally decide you want to make that sale, when you finally decide that you want to commit your life to Jesus Christ, you can do it. At any time you can give us a call. We keep this baptistry open. And you can join your Lord and Savior, Jesus, in the waters of baptism, into His burial, and into His resurrection, to live a new life. If that's a decision that you want to make today, please come as we stand and sing.